So let's discuss how to alter or modify a table's structure or settings. And for this demonstration, just want to make sure that you are in sync with me, and that means you have MySQL Server running. I have MAMP, okay, and I ran it earlier, okay, and I have also MySQL Workbench running. Okay, so to begin, let's use this connection. Let me click on this. Okay, now remember, if you have your MySQL Server installed using MAMP, it creates a user account with the username root as well as a password that's also root. Of course, if you installed MySQL using some other means, like you downloaded MySQL on its own, not using MAMP, and installed it, yeah, you're gonna have a totally different configuration or user account. Okay, so all right, and let's see what we have here. So I got a query tab already open. Now, if I refresh the schema section, so what I have are two databases. I have test and school, and I have the following tables as well. So for this demonstration, I think I'm going to create a different database just for the fun of it. Okay, so let me control scroll to make the font bigger. All right, so what I'm going to do is, so let's create a database. All right, so for that we need a statement, create database. Okay, and of course we're going to put the database name. So let's call this electronics store. Right. For a lack of name, I'm running out of ideas right now. Okay, next, we can also add uh, the if not exists. If you are automating this process, you can do that. But yeah, I'm just going to skip that if not exists keyword or keywords. And then, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify the character set. Okay, character set. Oops. And we want UTF-8. Okay. And I also want to specify the collation setting. So that means collate. And let's see, UTF-8 underscore general CI. CI again stands for case insensitive. And let's put a semicolon. So running this, say query, execute all, or I can press Control Shift Enter, or return if you're using a Mac. All right, so indeed we have a database created called Electronics Store. If I refresh my schemas, that indeed is true. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to type another statement because we want to create a table, but before we can start working inside this database, we have to run the use statement. So use electronics store. Okay, so if we run this, and I just want the current statement, so that means Control Enter. Okay, so as you can see, this database, in fact, even in the schemas, its name became bold because now I'm sort of inside this database. So now the MySQL Workbench knows, or rather, I should say, my MySQL server knows that any statements that I run from this point onwards will be towards or sort of against that database. Okay, so let me see. So well, actually, you know what? I'm just gonna leave that alone. I'm gonna create another tab, another query tab, I mean, I can deal with the saving later on. So let's see. Now we want to create a table. Okay. Now there's some things that you can, I guess, in a way, say do before you start working in your database. Like, for example, you can run show tables. I'm going to click query, execute current statement, or I can use execute all since that's the only thing I have there. But anyway, I clicked on execute the current statement, and right now it's empty indeed. Okay, so this came up. Okay, this is the result grid. That came up after I ran the statement. Okay, so let me just shrink these a little bit. Okay, yeah, you know what? All right, so show table, so there's nothing. Now, next, what I'm going to do is create table. So create table statement always has to have create table followed by the name of the table. So for example, let's say I want to create a table for disk drives. Okay, so disk drives. Okay, and it's actually a good thing to take note of whether if you're getting, color coding, if you are, uh, if that became color coded like these, exactly like this color, chances are the name that you entered there is a keyword within the SQL language and SQL language, so you may want to change it to something else. So, all right, so create table disk drives, and then that's followed by parentheses, okay? And what goes between these parentheses are the fields and their corresponding settings or respective settings, okay? So I'm just going to push this down. So that in itself is the create table statement. Of course, that is incomplete indeed. That's why you see a wavy underline. I'm just going to push that down a couple of lines so I can now tab and type my fields. So for example, I'm going to put here drive ID. Okay, so we put, uh, at the basic level, let me see. Okay, so we got the create database. So the basic level, you put the the field name followed by the data type, and then followed by any modifiers that you have. Speaking of which, we have been using the MySQL reference. Let me just switch over to that for as to give us some guidance into getting used to the create, the syntaxes of the statements, and that's good. Now, if you find that somewhat challenging, okay, which it is because this is a manual, so apparently that's gonna have every single thing that they want to say about the statement, which is understandable. And if you don't like that, there are other references out there. One of which is W3 Schools. Okay, now some people don't like it, some people like it, but I'm not here to like or dislike this reference. I'm just here for the information that's available. If it's good, I'll use it. If it's not, I'll go find something else. So I don't need to complicate my life. All right, so the create table statement, they simplified it, and it's like that. So you put create table followed by the name, and then between the parentheses like this, you put the name of the field or the columns of your table followed by the data type. And of course, don't forget to put a comma to put in the next field and so on and so forth. Now, again, this you can use this as your fallback. Let's say if you find some statement in the manual that, oh my gosh, this is so hard to use, so you can just easily jump there. Again, the address is w3schools.com. They got some other, they got tutorials for some other things as well. Okay, so going back to the business here. All right, so I want to create a field called drive ID, and I'm going to make that, let's say, int. Okay, and I'm going to create, you know what? Let me let's call this drvid, drv name. Why? I just want to shorten the name. Okay, drv name, varchar, let's say 50, and drv price, decimal. Let's say I'm going to put here 6 comma 2. Now again, to read this, this is actually what it means. It means that you your prices, they are composed of 6 digits, and that includes the decimal places. So in other words, something like, for example, if I were to put a comment here just in the middle of things, so the price will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so that's 6 digits in total. And out of that 6 digits, you are devoting the last two, for sort of like the cents part, or the fractional part, or the decimal part. Okay, so again, you would know what number to put here by understanding the products themselves. So if you, by interviewing the organization or the client, that owns that store, you can ask, hey, how much do your drive prices go up to? How far do they go? So now, if you want to leave yourself some extra headroom, maybe drive prices go a lot more expensive than that. And depending on the models, depending on the market, so they can go up to 5 digits, sometimes even more. So yeah, you can put some higher number there. Sorry, you can put 8. So you just give yourself some headroom, so to speak. But in any case, so notice how where I put the comma, but that doesn't really matter. I could have put it here and put the comment there. I used the multi-line comment because if I do this, if I use a single line comment, anything that follows after this will be part of the comment. Okay, so I don't want to mess things up. So you know what? I'm just going to leave the comment alone. I'm going to take it out. Okay, so let's say I did that. Now I know some of you may say, "Well, Joel, you're missing a few bits and pieces." That's okay. In fact, we're going to get to that in a minute. But first, let's go ahead and run this statement. Now remember, this is one statement. It's not like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 statements here. Now this is one statement, and you know that it's one statement because you look at the bracket that Workbench put, or even, in fact, the semicolon here denotes that's the end of that one long statement broken in several lines. Okay. So let me run this one statement, execute current statement. Okay. So indeed, we see that it created the table. So you see, this is action number 4 right down here. All right. So 0 rows affected. Okay. 0 rows affected because we're not adding information or anything like that. Well, except for the create database earlier, it somehow reports it as 1 row. Okay, so something like that. Okay, you have this feature, the schema section. Thanks to Workbench, you can verify that your table exists and it has the following columns. But let's say you cannot rely on that. Maybe you're typing your SQL statements not in the Workbench, maybe in some other place, some other development tool. How would you know what you've created is there? So you can run the show tables. So in fact, I don't need to retype this. I'm just going to go back to this statement. I'm going to click right there where that statement is, execute selection, or current statement. All right, so there you go. There's our table. Okay, so indeed the table was created, that we have verified that. And now what I'm going to do is type a statement that says describe disk drives. Okay, so let's see what that will do. And I'm going to run. Now, bear in mind that you can run your statements like this, memorize the keyboard shortcuts. In fact, you can even use these buttons in this toolbar. So like if you click that, that runs the current statement. In fact, since I'm on this line where this statement is, I click that and boom, we got this. Well, what's this? Okay, so it shows me the structure of that table. So I can see here, the drive ID is integer. It's taking up, well, size 11. Drive name varchar 50, drive price 62, null, yes, 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 and there's no primary key. If you notice that, that's good. Okay. Um, Again, the purpose of this demonstration is for you to get a little bit of a review from the previous discussions, but also to focus on the alter. Okay, the alter um, statement. Okay, so let me use this reference. In fact, let me point out that you have the alter statement that can be used to alter quite a number of things. It's not just table. You can use the alter database. Okay, and this in fact was covered in a previous discussion. So if you inadvertently did not put the character set or the collation setting, you can use this and run it to say alter database and put your database name, and then you put the character set that you actually want or the collation setting that you want. Now, for this discussion, I should say, I need to set the primary key. Now, take note that I have already created the table, and so uh, how do I modify the table structure after I've created it? Do I have to drop it? Of course not. Okay, so the reference says, okay, you just need alter table name, alter table and then the table name, and then followed by your specification, like what do you want to do? Okay, do you want to add a field? Do you want to add a constraint? Do you want to modify the character set of the table or a column? Do you want to assign a primary key or get rid of one? Okay. Now, so what? Okay, let's see what W3 School says. So if you find that again a little bit confusing or a little bit overwhelming, that's okay. Some students are first time learning SQL or some computer language, that can get really overwhelming. So here we have examples of the alter table. So they kind of simplified it, if you will. You can take a look at this, and you'll see that even they point out the differences across various database systems, the popular database systems. So you got MySQL, MySQL, or Oracle. It's pretty much the same thing. Alter table, modify column, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you even have an example. Okay, so that's all good. All right. So if you have trouble, or if you find the MySQL reference overwhelming, you can always feel free to use W3 Schools or some other reference. Okay. All right. So going back to the workbench. Okay, so I'm just going to keep these statements where they are, and I'm going to create a separate tab. And you don't have to necessarily do this. You can have everything everything in one tab. I just tend to do this just to make it, just to give my screen less clutter. Right, so I want to, given the structure, okay, I want to make drive ID the primary key. Okay, so primary key, as discussed before, it's a field with unique values. Each value there in that column can be used to identify every single row in that table. All right, so how do I use the alter table statement to make that happen? So according to this, okay, so we put alter table name. So let's do that. Let's switch over to, okay, so I just switched over to MySQL Workbench. So we put alter table and then the table name, which is drives, disk drives, right? Drives. Okay. So if our intention is to, like in this case, we forgot, imagine, oh, we forgot to put a primary key, we forgot to make drive ID as our primary key. Not a problem. You can issue an alter table statement to make that happen. But after that the initial part of your statement, what comes next is the add primary key. In fact, let me show you. So I have here add. Okay, where is that? All right, there you go. So it says add, and you can put the constraints that you want, and then followed by primary key. And again, this is the alter specification section. And if to read the syntax, so you put alter table name followed by the alter specification, and you can put another alter specification comma, another alter specification, so on and so forth. And these are ORs. See these pipes, when you press shift backslash on your keyboard. Okay, so that means you can have these or these or these and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's how you read the syntax. So it says so you can use one of these, or you can, if you're putting a primary key, you can put add, whatever your constraints are, and then your primary key, and then you put the name of the column that you want to make as your primary key. So to boil it down to simpler terms, so we want to put here add, okay, primary key, and then in parentheses we have to put the name of the field. So for example, in this case, we needed drvid to be our primary key. Okay, so that means we put here drvid. Okay, so I don't see any wavy underlines, so which means that this statement looks good. Okay, and if you're not sure, you can always run it and just see the output. I mean, in this case, we're not running. We're running data definition statements. So, well, I guess the worst thing can happen is you delete your database. Anyway, all right, I'm gonna run this. Okay, let's see the output. What happened to my output? Okay, there you go. So, it looks good. I got a check mark. In fact, just to verify that, I'm gonna go back to my other tab where I have the describe statement. I don't need to retype it. I mean, I could, but it's okay. It's here. So I'm gonna run that describe statement. Okay, let's see. Yep, there you go. So now we have the drive ID. It says here under the key column, it's primary. So that's cool. That's perfect. Okay. Now there's some other things here. As soon as I've made it a primary key, this null column became no. Earlier it was yes. Okay, so what does that mean? Actually, that's a null constraint. That's saying now, hey, this is a primary key. So when you add data to this table, nulls are not allowed. In other words, this column must have a value. Okay, you must put data into this column when you're adding records into this table. That's what it's saying. Now these say yes, so which means that they can actually be blank. They can be null. All right. So for the sake of discussion, let's say, well, Joel, I want these also to be not null. Okay, I want these to say no. All right. So let me go back to my other tab. Yeah. So how do you do that? Okay. I'm gonna need alter table disk drives, and you're gonna need a statement. It's called modify column. There are statements. Let me see. There's change column. There's alter column in MySQL. But what you need when you're changing settings like field size, data type, what you're going to need is the modify column. So we're going to put here modify column drv name. Now I know that we already put in the data type, but the thing is you have to retype the data type even if you already have it in place, like even if you're not going to change it. It is the requirement of the syntax. Now if you want to, let's say, also take this opportunity to increase the field size, then by all means. Now remember, making your field size bigger. Let's say if I extend this to 100, oops, if I extend this to 100, um, in terms of if this table already has data, that shouldn't be a problem because you're just making more room for for more characters. But imagine if that's already 50, or maybe it's already it's set to something like, let's say, maybe smaller, and then you decrease that even further. So let's say from 25 to 10. You're going to truncate data. You're going to get some warnings when you run this because that's going to cut off, some of the data that's found in that column, and that's dangerous. Okay, so you make sure, there are consequences to this, so you have to be very, very careful when you're changing the settings of your fields, especially if your table has data in it. Okay, which is why before you start putting data, you want to review thoroughly the settings of your table, the settings of your database, because once data is there, although you can make changes to the structure, uh, you can end up messing up the data, practically. Okay, I would do a backup before I make any changes to the structure, and that's what I actually do myself. I back up the data just in case something happens. At least I have a copy of the data. Okay, so now I don't want to cut it down to 10. Let's say I want to keep it 50, but I want to keep adding not null. Okay, and in fact, I want to add modify column drv price, and right now it's well, let's see the other tab. Decimal 6 comma 2. Okay, so decimal 6 comma 2. That to me is fine. Although, you know what, just to play around with things, I'm going to change that to 7. Okay, just, it's like saying I want that to allow for a larger, basically for higher priced drives. Like 7 digits in total, and out of the 7, 2 of them are for the decimal. So like somewhere in the price range of tens and thousands, of dollars. Okay, so I don't want that null either. I want every single drive to have a price, not only the name. What else can I put here? Now, actually, speaking of which, let me bring back the create table syntax because, and you might find this weird that we're going back to the create table, although we're discussing alter table, and that's because I want to make changes to the unsigned characteristic of the decimal. Okay, so as you can see here, decimal, and then we can put the word unsigned. Now, zero fill is if we want, the number to have zeros, like let's say there are 5, they're supposed to be, let's say, 8 digits, and we want to include zeros in the beginning. I mean, that would be an option, but I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in putting the unsigned, modifier, constraint, whatever you want to call it. Um, yeah, some people call it constraint. I'm not sure why it's called constraint, but um, in any case, I want to say unsigned. Okay. Now let's review the syntax one more time because column definition, you put the not null. Well, actually, you put the data type followed by the not null. Okay. So if you look at this create table syntax, these are the data types. The not null comes after the data type, and the data type part of the syntax mentions the type setting, the actual type, so in this case decimal, the size setting, plus the unsigned. So in other words, this will be wrong. Okay, in fact, we already kind of see that it has a way beyond the line because the unsigned specification is part of the data type, specification. Okay, so that's why it has to come before the not null. So in other words, I'm gonna put that there. See, wavy underline goes away, and then put not null. Okay, so it's like forming sentences. You cannot just jumble words and expect the meaning of the sentence to be the same. No, of course not. Like Apple ate the tree. I mean, John ate the apple. And if you change the words around, like Apple ate John, that's scary. So, yeah. So modify column DRV price decimal 7,2 unsigned not null. Um, I think I'm okay with this. Well, let me review the table once again. DRV ID. You know what? I want also an unsigned on the drive ID because it doesn't make sense to have negative numbers in there. In the same way that the price, I put unsigned there because, well, I'm not I'm not planning to also store negative prices. Unsigned means there's no negative sign, so to speak. So that's why I made it unsigned. Okay, I'm not interested. Although in some database systems the price can be negative, like in bank systems. um, so yeah, I'm not interested in making that or storing negative signs there. So say for the drive ID, you can put that here. Yeah, you don't have to put the modifications in the same order as your fields. So look at this. I'm putting a modification for the drive ID, although that's the first field. It comes in as a third modification here. So drive ID's field, is int. That's the data type setting. So I want it unsigned. Okay. But there's also one more thing that I want to do here, and that is um, I want to put the, oops, not that. Okay, I want to put the auto increment. Okay, so what is that? What is the auto increment? Okay, in fact, I'm in the create table statement reference. So you see here in the column definition, so we put the data type. Okay, that was the int part. We put unsigned. Okay, that's still part of the data type setting. So it was int. The length is optional, hence it's in square brackets. Okay, and then we put unsigned. Let me switch back here. Okay, so indeed the RV int unsigned, but okay, let me see. Okay, so unsigned int unsigned, not null. We already have that in the field earlier when we set it to become the primary key. Okay, so unsigned, and we want the auto increment. So the auto increment in the column definition is right here. Okay, so it comes after the data type, after the not null, if we have one, and we don't have one, but so it comes after those two. So we can put auto increment. But what does that do? The auto increment setting or definition or constraint, whatever you want to call it, is simply to say to the database system, look, I want you, database system, like in this case MySQL, to put a value, to put in this case a number, and it only works for numbers, it only works for integers, to put a number into this field, and I want that number to automatically increase every time I put a row or a record, or in practical terms, every time I add a disk drive into this table. I want MySQL to generate a number automatically, and I want that number to be higher than the previous one. Okay, so if it's the first one, chances are it's going to have an ID of 1. The next drive that I put here, that column will automatically have a value of 2, and so on and so forth. So that's what auto increment means. Like if you want the system to generate a number on its own, okay, you don't want to provide a number to that column yourself. You just want something internal generated automatically. So that's the setting that you need. Okay. So I'm gonna put a semicolon there to indicate I'm done with my modifications. I'm gonna go ahead and run this statement. So I'm gonna click this lightning bolt with an I bar. Okay, so I don't see any errors. Zeros affected, 0 warnings, and check mark here, green check mark. Perfect. So let's see if it indeed made my changes and made it happen. So let me click on this line where the describe statement is to show us the structure. Remember, describe is to show the structure. So I'm going to run the current statement. All right, and we see that its ID is int 10 unsigned. Perfect. No nulls, that became a consequence after we made it a primary key earlier. Default value is just no, it's just null. The default column is what will be its value if you don't put one. So that applies if you had the null to yes. Extra settings, auto increment. Okay, so drive name 50 characters still, but no nulls. Our price now became 7.2 instead of 6.2 earlier. Unsigned, so no negative signs. Okay, so yep, that's how you make changes to your table. If you have to drop a primary key, if you want to get rid of a primary key, there is a drop statement. Let me bring you there. Um, yep, so there's drop primary key. Okay, you can get rid of the primary key that you assign to a column or to that table. You can also add another column. So in fact, just for the fun of it, as a proper conclusion to this, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep on spelling as alert. All right, alter table disk drives, add column. What do I want to add? I want to add a column called drive, say description, or actually drive size. So the capacity of the drive, like in gigabytes, or yeah, let's say it's in gigabytes. Let's call this DRV. Yeah, DRV size GB. So we know that it's expressed in gigabytes, not megabytes or terabytes. Okay, so drive size GB. Um, Drive capacities can be decimal. They're not necessarily whole numbers. So I'm going to put here decimal. It'll be the size setting. Um, let's say I want it to go up to thousands, because a thousand gig is a terabyte, right? So, and I want, let's say, to allow for 2 decimal places. So that 1,000 is 4 digits plus 2 decimal places is 6. So let's give ourselves some extra headroom. So we'll put here 8, comma 2. Yep, there's no such thing as negative capacity, so we're going to put unsigned. We don't want it null either. Okay, so let's do that. Let's run this. Okay, yep, so no errors, green check mark. Let's verify that. Let's use the describe statement. Let's run that again. And there we go. We got the size GB added. Do note that you can add a field to a specific part of your column. In other words, you can, let's find here. All right, so it says add column, right? And you can add it to a specific place in your table. Like you want it at the first as the first column, you want it after a certain column that already exists. So yeah, you can put that there. I mean, I didn't use it because I don't really care if it gets added towards the end. You're like, it becomes the drive size GB becomes the last field. So I really didn't care. And yep, there you go. So we've got it verified. Let's go back to statements. So voila. This is how you alter tables. I hope you enjoyed this video.